Hello friends, this is the Gearbox Pro Ultimate. It's the latest in Gearbox's lineup, and on the surface at least, it looks like a slightly thicker version of the original Gearbox Pro Power released last year. According to Gearbox, they made some adjustments to the Ultimate to create more dwell time, a larger sweet spot, and more control. I've hit with this paddle now for 2 weeks, and I have some thoughts. Let's get into it. Before we dive into the specs, metrics, and performance, let me start with a disclosure. Gearbox sent me this paddle to test for a potential review with no obligations. No money changed hands, and Gearbox did not have any input on this video's production or get to preview it before it was published. I've never taken payment for this review or any others. But if you use my affiliate link in the description below to purchase this paddle, I get a commission. Gearbox doesn't give discounts on their paddles, but you don't pay anything additional with the affiliate link, and it helps out this channel. Okay, back to it. The Gearbox Pro Power burst onto the scene late last year, jumping way ahead of every other option as the most powerful paddle on the market. And now, after 9 months, it still holds the title as the most powerful legal paddle on the market. The YOLO Gen 3s gave it a run for its money, but since they are now delisted, the Pro Power is still #1 for firepower on the USAP approved paddle list. Gearbox's goals with the Pro Ultimate were to make a more forgiving paddle with better control and nearly as much firepower as the Pro Power, reducing its power by about 5%. So let's jump in and find out if they hit these goals. The Pro Ultimate costs $275, and like I mentioned earlier, they don't do discounts, but if you use my affiliate code in the description below, it helps out this channel with a kickback. Currently, there's only one shape option for the Ultimate, which is the elongated. It measures 7.375 inches wide by 16.5 inches long, and the handle is 5.5 inches. So far, these are the same dimensions as the Pro Power Elongated. The only difference is the thickness. The Ultimate is thicker at 16 millimeters versus the Pro Power at 14 millimeters. Okay, moving on to materials and technology. For the most part, the insides of the Ultimate look the same as the Pro Power. So the same SST core with segmented carbon fiber ribs filled with foam, surrounded by a foam perimeter, bound by a carbon fiber seam to create an edgeless unibody design. I'm not going to get into the weeds with the SST technology here. If you want to know more about that, check out my review of the original Pro Power series at the link I'll put on the screen now. When I first heard about this paddle, I thought, okay, so this is a thicker version of the Pro Power. But after digging into it, there are some other adjustments that were made. So first, I'd like to discuss what they changed in the Ultimate compared to the Power series and what that's supposed to translate to in terms of performance. And later, I'll get into my own test results and gameplay experience to see how the paddle measures up to Gearbox's claims. Besides being thicker, there are 3 main changes made to the Pro Ultimate. First, they changed the layup angles and the modulus of the carbon fiber in the face layers, frame, and ribs of the core. Very thin layers of unidirectional carbon fiber are used for all of these elements. And when these carbon fiber layers are oriented at different angles to one another, you get different levels of stiffness. When they're oriented at 90 degrees, the sheet becomes very stiff, and as you reduce the angle closer to 45 degrees or even closer to parallel, it becomes softer and has more give. They also included a carbon fiber with a lower modulus, which relates to elasticity. So they were able to adjust the stiffness throughout the paddle, making some areas more stiff and other areas more elastic. The second change is that they reduced the density of the carbon fiber ribs so that they weigh less without losing tensile strength. Getting the weight of the carbon fiber ribs down allowed them to add more weight as foam within the core, which is the third change. There are different types of foam inside this core, which includes expanding foam and EVA. By using more expanding foam between the areas with EVA, the EVA foam was then compressed more by the expanding foam, creating more density within the EVA, which helps with vibration damping. So what was the goal with all this tinkering? A plusher feel, a bigger sweet spot, and more control. and a paddle that still gets good power. Okay, so let's check out my testing to see if these goals were met. I ran my usual testing protocol on this paddle, capturing ball spin and speed with a Doppler radar signature and taking measurements of swing weight, twist weight, and balance point, and then combining all these data into various indices to help clarify various aspects of the paddle's performance. The boxes at the top of this graphic give you the raw numbers, and the radar chart on the bottom shows where these numbers fall in terms of percentiles for over 200 paddles in my database. High values over on the left side of the chart indicate more firepower, and high values on the top right of the chart relate to the paddle's control and forgiveness. Finally, the bottom of the chart tells you about maneuverability and hand speed. Right away, you can see that the radar chart is heavy up top and at the bottom. So there's a lot of power on the top left, which I define as the velocity imparted on the ball with full swings like drives and serves, and the stacked percentiles on the bottom of the chart indicate a high swing weight and balance point, which isn't good for hand speed and maneuverability. So this paddle is going to feel sluggish in your hand compared to most others on the market right now. So again, over on the left, pop is above average but lower than power. I define pop as the velocity imparted on a ball with shorter strokes like punch volleys, counters, and flicks. In the control sector over on the upper right of the chart, we have a moderate value for spin, which falls at the 41st percentile, and a very low value for twist weight at the 7th percentile. If we're looking at these numbers alone, control on this paddle doesn't look very promising. In a minute, we'll see how the various tweaks they made to the core translate to performance on the court and see if the Ultimate performs better in the control realm than what we're seeing on paper here. Okay, so how do these metrics compare to other paddles on the market? First, let's compare the Ultimate to the original Pro Power Elongated. They both have about the same level of spin, so both right at around 2,000 RPM. The Ultimate has a slightly higher swing weight, as is expected with a thicker core, and a slightly higher twist weight, although I would have hoped for much more in this department. The Ultimate's twist weight is 5.43 compared to the Pro Power at 5.22, so you're only gaining 0.2 points in twist weight. The power measurements for the Ultimate and Pro Power are very close, falling at the 95th and 97th percentiles, but pop is much more muted on the Ultimate, falling at the 63rd percentile compared to the Pro Power's 93rd percentile. So when looking at the firepower metric, which combines power and pop and is scored from 0 to 100, the Ultimate falls quite a bit lower at 81 compared to the Pro Power's 95. I'll talk more about the comparisons between these two paddles later when I'm describing my experience with them during gameplay. But it's important to note here that these metrics were taken before the break-in period, so we're comparing apples to apples. Okay, so let's expand this comparison to other paddles on the market. The firepower and balance of power and pop on the Ultimate are most similar to the Pursuit Pro 1 6.0, 6.0 Black Diamond Power 14mm, and the Proton Series 4. Okay, so moving on to gameplay. When I was comparing the Pro Ultimate side by side with the Pro Power, the first thing I noticed was the softer feel and more forgiving sweet spot on the Ultimate. I mean, is the sweet spot edge to edge? Absolutely not, but it's definitely more forgiving than the original Pro Power. Even stock without any perimeter weighting, the sweet spot feels noticeably bigger on the Ultimate. So in this regard, I'd say the improvement to the sweet spot is actually bigger than the slight bump in twist weight would suggest. And the second thing I noticed was that the Ultimate was more muted and less poppy than the Pro Power. I felt that dip in firepower across the court with all types of strokes, but particularly at the kitchen during the soft game and during firefights. This matches the performance metrics that I collected, which showed less pop for the Ultimate versus the Power, which was a bit lower, but pretty close to the Pro Power. So what these two main differences translated to on the court was much better control for the Ultimate compared to the Pro Power. So now I'm going to expand this comparison to the general paddle market today to give a sense of where the Pro Ultimate sits in the current landscape. Because a lot has changed since the Pro Power series was released 9 months ago. As my firepower metric suggests, the Pro Ultimate does generate a good amount of power, scoring 81 out of 100. Like I mentioned earlier, this puts it in line with other paddles such as the 16mm Engage Pursuit Pro 1 and the new 6.0 Black Diamond 14mm, but below the PaddleTech Bantam and Tempest TKOC. So during gameplay, my serves and drives had a good amount of power when I really wound up and took a good swing at the ball. And the pop was more muted, which to me struck a good balance at the kitchen for control with the soft game. But there was still enough pop there to be offensive with extra counters. In fact, the pop on the Ultimate falls right in line with the paddle that I'm currently maining, the Course Shapeshifter, so it felt very familiar to me in that regard. But to me, the main weakness of this paddle is working your way through the transition zone. I was having a hard time getting consistent resets in this area. And I was finding that my resets would either go too high and be easy putaways, or more often would go into the net. Especially when I tried to hit a volley reset instead of off the bounce, the ball would often just die and hit the net. This is where the low twist weight really hurts the paddle, in my opinion. I'm used to playing with a hybrid-shaped paddle with a much larger twist weight, and there's just more forgiveness when the ball hits the paddle off-center. And this is especially important when volleying the ball because you're holding your paddle sideways, so you have to be more precise because the width of the paddle is much smaller than its length. I will say that the Ultimate is much improved in this regard over the original Pro Power, but compared to all other paddles, I'd say the Ultimate is lacking in the transition zone. Some of these issues can be corrected with perimeter weighting, which I'll cover in the next section. I also noticed that the Ultimate felt a bit sluggish in my hands, which is expected given its larger swing weight and balance point. Its swing weight is 122, which is above average, but the paddle felt more sluggish and harder to maneuver than other paddles with comparable swing weights. That's probably because it has one of the highest balance points of any paddle, falling at the 99th percentile. So this high balance point compounds the swing weight and makes it feel more sluggish. But again, some of this can be corrected with weight modification, so let's get into that now. This is a paddle that really benefits by adding weight in strategic spots. The biggest adjustment we want to make on this is to raise the stock twist weight, which is really low and reflects a narrow sweet spot. To most effectively raise the twist weight, you need to add weight at the widest point of the paddle along the lateral edges. The issue with doing this is that you also increase swing weight, which is already high on the Ultimate. So to optimize performance, I added tungsten tape along the neck and up to the low edges along their widest point, but trying to keep it low on the paddle to minimize effects to swing weight. I also added tungsten to the base of the handle. A slice cap would have been perfect in the handle, but they don't work on gearboxes because the stock handle cap doesn't come off. So I wrapped the heavier 1 gram per inch tungsten tape twice around the very bottom of the handle, and then I added another row just above the first one, keeping that one just 1 layer thick to make it more tapered so I wouldn't feel a sharp bulge in the handle. This added a total of 13 grams to the handle, or just under a half an ounce. I also put 2 5-inch strips of tungsten tape along the edges, starting just above the grip and extending up the sides right up to the point where the lettering starts. So this brought the static weight up to 8.83 ounces. It raised the swing weight to 124, brought the twist weight up to 5.98, and it lowered the balance point to 23.8 centimeters. To me, the paddle didn't feel any heavier despite adding nearly an ounce of weight because the balance point was lowered significantly from the 99th percentile down to the 40th percentile. Granted, you are moving around more weight on the paddle, so you might feel it on larger strokes like serves and drives, but the improved balance helps with whip on the paddle, making it more maneuverable for shorter strokes and wristy movements. I also noticed a slight improvement in the sweet spot and forgiveness of the paddle with this extra weight. I would have liked to add more weight to the sides to get the twist weight higher because even at 5.98, we're only at the 29th percentile for twist weight. But we're limited here with how much perimeter weight can be added because the paddle comes stock with a high swing weight. So in my mind, this setup is a pretty optimal customization of the paddle that'll benefit most people and most playstyles. Another topic I wanted to discuss is the break-in period. For the original Gearbox Pro Power series, there was a noticeable increase in power output after a break-in period. The estimates of this period varied with different people, but with my Pro Power elongated paddle, it was mostly broken in after about 10 to 20 hours of playtime. So after the break-in, the most notable change was an increase in power output. I went back and re-measured power and pop on my Pro Power that had been used for about 3 months, and it got a 6% bump in power and a 4% bump in pop over where it started when it was new. Right now, I'm at about 10 hours of playtime with the Ultimate, and so far, I've noticed a very subtle loosening up of the paddle with maybe a slight bump in power and pop. I do need more time with it though to know if a similar bump in firepower will occur after it's more broken in. Earlier in the video, I mentioned that Gearbox made several adjustments to the Pro Ultimate over its predecessor, the Pro Power, with 4 goals in mind. 1, a plusher feel. 2, a bigger sweet spot. 3, more control. And 4, all of these things in a paddle that still gets good power. So, were they successful? Well, it depends on what you're comparing it to. So if you're only comparing the Ultimate to the Pro Power, then the answer is a resounding yes to all 4 of these things. But if you're comparing the Pro Ultimate to all other paddles on the market today, I'd say that the Ultimate performs well in some areas, but underperforms in others. And I think Gearbox missed a major opportunity here to take all of the same groundbreaking technology that they have in the Ultimate and put that into a different shaped paddle that would have outperformed 99% of paddles out there today. Let me explain. I think the Ultimate absolutely outperforms the Pro Power. Yes, you're losing some firepower with the Ultimate, but what you gain in control and forgiveness, I think, more than makes up for it. In fact, one of my friends who's in the play footage for this video has been playing with the Pro Power for the past 6 months, and he much preferred the Ultimate during the few games he played with it. He said that the sweet spot was way bigger, his resets and control game immediately got better, and one of his biggest pet peeves with the Pro Power wasn't there with the Ultimate. And that is, he was able to keep returns of serves in much easier with the Ultimate. And I have experienced the same thing. It seemed like with the Pro Power, if you use the exact same swing on the exact same serve, the ball would sometimes land 5 feet inside the baseline, and other times it would hit the back fence. Now, that being said, I think that Gearbox released the Ultimate in the wrong shape, at least for the majority of players out there today. Overall, I feel like Gearbox is way ahead of everybody else in terms of materials and technology, but they're lagging behind when it comes to paddle shapes. Even their newest shapes, the Elongated and Integra, are both just odd to me. They're both leaving valuable paddle space and dimensions on the table according to USAP rules, which state that the combined paddle length and width cannot exceed 24 inches. The design of both the Elongated and Integra creates narrow paddles, both of which are below 7.5 inches in width. So they could have expanded the width of the Elongated by 0.125 inches and the Integra by a full 0.625 inches. I realized that these designs were intentional with the goal of maximizing hand speed, but to me, there's a much better trade-off in performance with the added twist weight that paddle width provides, especially for an edgeless paddle, which already suffers in the area of twist weight. Anyway, I do think the SST core with the segmented ribs used in the Pro Power and the Ultimate is the most advanced paddle technology technology on the market right now. And it has some of the most potential, in my opinion, given the capacity to fine-tune stiffness, power output, and vibration frequencies across the face of the paddle with carbon fiber orientation and modulus and foam density. I mean, this is really cool stuff, but again, in my opinion, I think Gearbox missed an opportunity here to potentially transform the current paddle market by releasing the Ultimate in a wide body shape with a long handle. That paddle, I think, would absolutely kill it. So something at least 8 inches wide with a handle length somewhere between 5.3 and 5.5 inches. That might just be the most powerful wide body paddle on the market, but still with good control and a wide, forgiving sweet spot. And if it can make a more aggressive surface texture that gets around 2300 RPM for spin, that paddle would tick all the boxes for most people. Speaking of spin, I do want to give Gearbox props on the durability of their raw carbon fiber surface. Although it doesn't get the highest spin levels out of the box, coming in right around 2000 RPM, the unique curing technology that Gearbox uses does seem to resist wear and maintain the paddle's spin potential longer than most other raw textures. A few months ago in our podcast, I compared the spin loss on several used paddles to when they were new, and after 3 months of play, the Gearbox Pro Power only lost 11% of its spin, while most other paddles with raw materials that I looked at lost around 20%. Anyway, I do think the Gearbox Pro Ultimate is a good paddle with great technology. So who would I recommend it for? Well, if you're currently using the Gearbox Pro Power Elongated, I think the Ultimate is an all-around better option. Or it's also a good option if you're currently using an edgeless elongated paddle and you're looking for a power upgrade without sacrificing too much in terms of control. It is one of the more expensive paddles on the market at $275, but honestly, with all the R&D and innovative technology in this paddle, I do think that's a fair price. Gearbox doesn't do discounts, but if you do decide to buy one and you found this video useful, please use my affiliate link in the description below. It doesn't cost you anything, but it gives me a kickback, which allows me to keep creating content like this. I do like that they toned down the power in this new Ultimate. At its broken end levels, the Gearbox Pro Power that was released last year exceeds the firepower levels of the delisted Yola paddles and EVA foam paddles. And I think that there's a consensus right now that this level of power is probably dangerous and bad for the game. So the Ultimate has a more reasonable power output and has more room to grow in power if the break-in period is a thing on the Ultimate before it gets into that controversial zone. Another issue I should discuss here is whether or not there's any danger of the Gearbox Pro Series getting delisted by USAP, given what's happened recently with Yola, Rhombus, and Vatic. I did have a conversation with the owner of Gearbox, Raphael, and asked him about the potential delisting issue. He said that he's been in direct communication with USAP, and there's no indication that any of Gearbox's paddles are in danger of delisting, and that USAP has verified all their paddles are compliant. So the whole ordeal with Yola Gen 3s seems to be mostly focused around the issue of Yola sending in the wrong paddles for similarity testing. So this does not apply to the Gearboxes. But the court documents in this case also bring up power levels, and specifically Yola's alleged violation of Section 2E6F in USAP's equipment guidelines, which prohibits a trampoline effect caused by flexible or compressible materials. I really dislike this regulation because it's entirely subjective and provides no specifics about what actually constitutes a trampoline effect. But if that regulation did play into USAP's delisting of Yola's Gen 3s, then it could presumably also be used for the SST core in the Gearbox Pro Series, which is very powerful and which also floats in a frame of foam that adds dwell time and returns energy to the ball. So it's complicated, but my hunch is that the Pro Series probably won't be delisted because it hasn't happened yet. But in the end, things are chaotic right now with USAP, and I can't say for sure that it won't happen to Gearbox too. So ultimately, if this is a concern for you, just take all of these things into consideration before pulling the trigger. Okay, that was a lot. I mean, you could have watched like half an episode of your favorite TV series by now, which would have been way more entertaining. But I mean, who doesn't want to sit down and listen to a 20-minute conversation about twist weight and carbon fiber modulus? As always, I do appreciate you, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next video.
Oh,